Hello and welcome to the first episode of The Love Doctor. My apologies for the audio today because I have a little microphone problem and I'm waiting on parts, but I had to get this out. I had to get it out today. So, in today's episode, we'll be discussing everyone's favorite topic and that they're afraid to talk about sex. I figured this was the best place to start. This is a place where I will gain credibility. Does that seem all right to you? All right. Now, many of you fellows look at sex as a release, as something that's pleasurable for you, and oftentimes you forget that there's a partner with you. Now, before you go any further, I need to make sure that everyone understands that this is heterosexual sex, okay? I can't speak for any other type of sex other than man and woman together. If you were looking for relationship information, help from me, and you're gay or lesbian, I don't think I can help you with that. And let me explain why. Because I'm a heterosexual man. I'm 61 years old, and at this very moment, I've lived a bit of a tumultuous life. I moved more times than anybody that I know of. I've had more short-term partners and long-term partners than anybody that I know of. Do I know a lot of people? That shouldn't matter. I'm going to explain to you a couple of really important things when it comes to making love to a woman. I have to admit, there are times that I just want to pound her and be done. There are times where I just want a blowjob and be done. And then there's 99% of the time where I want to make sure that she is completely satisfied. I feel like I should explain why they called me the love doctor. My friend Eric Schmidt was also a roommate and my voice coach. Together we would practice hundreds of songs to sing in public. That's really not important now. I moved from Colorado to Orlando. I drove straight through. It was 30 hours, grueling and painful and sleepy, and I made an appointment to go to Eric's house and see it to find out if I'd like to live there. Now, prior to leaving Colorado, I had connected with some women in Orlando in anticipation of dating some of them. And there was one particular woman that I was quite excited about. Her pictures were splendid, her personality was perfect, and as I could tell, so at the first opportunity, I wanted to spend with her. So, sometime with her, I would find out if we were compatible. Along the way, over the highways, through the woods, the mountains, across these great states of the United States, I arrived in Orlando, Florida. And she knew I was there. I told her as soon as I was finished with my transactions with Eric that I would like to meet her for coffee. I probably needed coffee more than she did after driving 30 hours. I unloaded my things into his house and off I went. Unfortunately, she did not meet my desire, my criteria, if you will. The date lasted about 10 minutes. I'd driven 31 hours to see her, and she fell short. I fell short. I wasn't her type either. Strange, we both made the decision not to pursue any relationship at all, and I never even got the coffee. When I returned back to Eric's house, he said it was the strangest thing he'd ever seen. He said on many occasions that it was very unusual for a guy to even care enough to drive to meet someone after driving from Colorado to Orlando. But it was never about sex. And although this episode is about sex, it was never about sex. A few days later, I had a job. I had an income and I had a date with Dee. Dee was a sexy blonde with blue eyes. She was obviously my type. I like blondes. She had a problem, though. She was married, and I was her affair. I found out this after having sex with her, and that really sucked. It's never really about the sex. You may think it's about the sex, but it's not about the sex. You can go down to the street corner, you can buy a very expensive woman that's less than a week's pay, and you would have a great time, like the best time. And that would be about sex. You could walk away from that. You could be satisfied, but you would feel empty. I know this because I had a friend who did that instead of having a relationship, and he felt empty about it. Eventually, he met Dee, and she destroyed his heart. Poor guy flew from Texas on her birthday to meet her and have this wonderful whirlwind weekend with her, and he was going to propose to her. He found out she was still married, and she'd lied to him the whole time. Dee was hot. I mean to tell you, she was hot. She dressed the part, she looked the part, she acted the part. Dee was fucking hot. No, from the perspective of a 20-year-old, not so much. If Dee was a 20-year-old, well, that might have worked out. You see, when you're young and you're unembellished, you have this tremendous amount of flexibility in relationships. Is unembellished the right word? It seems like the right word. I know that there are a lot of you out there waiting to hear about the sex and how to have great sex. Don't worry, I'll get to that. You need to know that I'm qualified to some degree to be able to tell you these stories so that you can understand whether or not I'm telling you the truth. Now, after D, there was a woman named B, like boy. My friend Eric wondered why in the world I would date such an ugly woman. Well, it's kind of strange. Beauty is skin deep. It's not skin deep. I'm sorry. I know you've heard this statement before. Beauty is not skin deep. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Someone who's lovely can be ugly. Someone who's gorgeous might be ugly on the inside, like D. And as it turned out, also B too. I learned a lot about sex from a couple of different places. Have you ever heard of the Penthouse Forum magazine? Penthouse Forum magazine. It's out of print, and you probably can't find a single copy of it anywhere, or anymore for that matter. It was an amazing little book. I believe it was a monthly. My mom and dad had a tremendous sex life. They were very active, all the way up to the end. And in the early days, my mom and dad would read about things that could help their sex life. They had a Dr. Ruth's book in my dad's top drawer underneath his socks. They had a book on sexual positions in my dad's second drawer underneath his underwear. In my mom's underwear drawer, I found the Penthouse Forum magazines. I was looking for magazines that had pictures that I could look at. And well, as a child, I was like 13 or 14, maybe 15 or 16. What I found was books that had stories about how people had sex together. They were short stories about love and making love. These were these little sexy things that taught me almost everything I needed to know. Taught me about oral sex, and it taught me about positions, taught me about something that is unknown to most men. And I'll get to that in a few minutes. Sex with B wasn't great. In fact, I'd almost say it was horrible. Now, most guys would say that sex with a woman is better than sex alone, and I'd have to disagree. Sometimes people's bodies don't fit together well, and it doesn't work. So take matters into your own hands. Before we go any further into sex, I need to give you some rules on dating. These are rules on dating. These things you need to know before you actually get somebody to bed. Like number one, don't sleep with someone on the first date, the first time you meet them. In other words, don't have sex with them the first time that you meet them. When you meet somebody the first time, you are on your best behavior. She's on her best behavior. Remember that. You guys are both on your best behavior. You don't even know what you're like. I would go ahead and have sex on the second date. That's fine. I usually waited until the third date, unless I was really into somebody. A couple of things happen when you wait. You may not realize it, but when you wait to have sex with someone, it shows them that you respect them. It shows them that sex is not the only thing that you're after. If that's what you're after, you need to find a different podcast. This isn't about sex. Remember, this is not about sex. I have so many things to tell you. I have so many important little things to tell you about how to get your best girl into bed with you and rock her world. Let's imagine for a minute, all right? You can keep your eyes open or you can close them. Go ahead and close them. Now, because you're listening to this podcast and you're reading, you don't have to worry about anything. Just close your eyes and imagine the very best perfect woman you could ever find in your entire life. What does she look like? Have you figured that out yet? Remember, she's everything to you. You found her and you don't want to let her go, ever. Does that feel right? Good. Now, you have to impress her. You have to win her. And you have to figure out ways to keep her at the same time. You have to make her want to do things for you. Remember, it's a relationship. It's a two-way street. It's not a dead-end, one-way street because you have to do things for her. Now, what you may not know is that oftentimes, if the sex is good, the woman wants it more than you do. You have the capability of having a single orgasm. You're done. You go to sleep. Good night, son. She, on the other hand, has the ability to have, in most cases, multiple orgasms. And it's up to you to bring those to her. It is your gift to her for joining you in bed. What most men don't understand is that women take a great deal of pleasure in giving a man pleasure. If you don't get off, she's not happy. If you're a conscientious lover, you too will take a great deal of pleasure in giving your woman pleasure. If you don't, well, you need to learn some things. If you can do that, you will be incredibly loved by the woman you're with. That is not entirely about sex. It's about something I call intimacy. Intimacy is an amazing thing. It goes beyond sex. I'll talk about that in a future podcast. As I was reading Penthouse Forum stories, I'd find myself aroused. And at age 13 or 14, 15, whatever it was, I was pretty sure that I didn't know what to do with that. And I took care of it on my own. And oftentimes men take care of their arousal on their own and they don't need a woman there. They think they don't. Well, that's baloney. See, I was just a boy and I was just exploring my body. And as I was figuring out what would happen when I would, whack off, as I read those little magazines, I kept a sock next to my bed. It was gross. Kids be gross. I know they can be gross. I was gross. You're probably grossed out now. I'm sorry, ladies. If you're listening to this, it's gross, but that's what guys do. They do when they're 15, 13 years old. Yeah, it's nasty. What this little magazine taught me was how the progression goes from giving a woman a kiss to giving the woman a kiss goodnight after a great night of sex. And I'm going to go into that, I promise. It may not all be today, but I'm going to get it started. I was married for 23 years, and that didn't work out. At 50, I found myself alone, lonely. I had had a companionship with a woman for a very long time, and her biggest complaint about sex was that I took too long. I haven't heard that from any other woman besides her. I don't believe that sex should be penetration, ejaculation, and snoring. I don't. Many guys don't even know what foreplay is. Well, I left the town with her and I went to Pennsylvania. I was there for about 6 weeks. I made myself an online match profile. I reached out to a few women. Didn't have a single date in Pennsylvania. I got a job in Colorado and off I went. A few weeks later, after arriving in Colorado, I had a date with this gorgeous blonde. She was so cool. She lived on a farm. She had horses. No, she didn't smell like a horse. No, she smelled nice. And she had this beautiful smile, nice curly blonde hair, bright blue eyes, and an amazing body. Her match pictures showed the body in different clothing. And when I met her, she was wearing a flannel shirt and a pair of jeans with boots over her jeans. She drove a truck and I drove a Honda CRV. We had a nice dinner together, and I thought we would have a second date. And she saw that I drove a 98 CRV and figured out that I didn't really fit into her life. That's okay. Then there was this beautiful brunette. She was about 15 years younger than me, and that didn't matter to her. It mattered to me. She'd been a cheerleader and a mom of some very young children, recently divorced. All she talked about was her ex-husband. One of the things that I like to do when I take someone out for the first time, I think about what it would be like if this relationship worked out, because it could, your relationship could work out. And I wanted to think about what it would be like if I was talking to our grandchildren 50 years from now, and the grandchildren were asking us questions like, oh, when was your first date and what did you do? I always thought it would be important to make sure that I had a really good first impression on that first date. I always picked a place that was nice. I always picked a place that was memorable, and I picked a place that had a lot of public viewing, and that way she would feel comfortable. I never invited anybody back to my apartment for the first date. That doesn't mean I wasn't invited to somebody else's house or apartment on the first date, and I'll tell you a little story about that later on. Maybe not this episode. It's something not to do, really. The date I had with the cheerleader was a one-off, if you will. I took her to this really nice restaurant. I spent a lot of money. And in the end, I didn't like her, and she didn't like me. She was high maintenance. Well, I'll explain that later, too. What I found out was that I didn't fit into what she was looking for, because she expected that kind of date.